Hi there, welcome to Nomadic Diaries. We're the podcast that takes you on journeys through the lives of those who have already embraced the international lifestyles. Whether you're an expat, a digital nomad, or someone who's dreaming of those lifestyles, this is your passport to a world of insight. We dive deep into the hearts and minds of the overseas lifestyle professionals, the authors, and researchers. Join us in this fun adventure as we deconstruct all the elements of expat and nomadic lifestyles, one captivating story at a time. So welcome, listeners. Here we have in the room Amy Suto, and she is, as I've just described to you, an interesting personality who's currently sitting in the city of London. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for coming to Nomadic Diaries to check in with us today.
Thanks for having me, Doreen. It's great to be here. Love talking about all things nomads and being an expat, and also sharing a bit about my new book, The Nomad Detective.
Yes, thank you. Tell me about the reaction that you have a little bit to the terminology regarding digital nomads, which you claim to be one, right? You are one. And expatriatism. And tell me a little bit about your reaction to those two terms.
Definitely. I think that when people think about expatriatism, I think there's often this sense of that you're moving abroad permanently and being in another country for the rest of your life or for a long stretch of time. When people think about digital nomads, I think the term evokes a lot more flexibility, especially in the remote work era, post 2020, people working through Zoom and being asynchronous. And so I think I like the term digital nomad. I think it can get a bad rap sometimes, but I like it because it kind of turns travel into something that feels a little bit more accessible for people who work remotely. And I also think that it's such a kind of fascinating world of these opportunities that people have to not only be freelancers, but have full-time jobs where they work asynchronously. And I travel with a lot of digital nomads who have been able to completely see the world and experience life differently because they're able to be digital nomads and kind of be a part of this lifestyle and find similar people in their communities of the realm of digital nomad.
Yeah. So, you talked about being travel is much more accessible. Certainly, the barriers to travel are crumbling daily, especially since COVID. But for those of us who lived overseas, especially for many decades, we tend to start to reflect on, so what has travel actually done for me? And is it a tool? And if it's a tool, how do I use it? Tell me how much that resonates with you. Do you consider travel as a tool?
Absolutely. And across several different kind of parts of my life, I see travel as a tool that's helped me. As a writer, I am an author. I write fiction these days. I basically kind of take my travels and like sense of place and the different people that I meet and get inspiration from my travels to write my fiction books and help me in that arena. But also I do work as a memoir ghostwriter. I've been ghostwriting memoirs for the past 8 years. And so my travels also help me meet clients. So over the past 8 years, I've traveled to some really amazing places and worked from all over the world with different clients who are CEOs, Silicon Valley, tech people and Olympians and really fascinating people who want their stories to be told. I was just in Singapore recently meeting with a client, helping her tell her story. And so it's been neat to be able to travel the world and kind of step into different people's lives and help them that way. And then lastly, I found a lot of healing through travel. When the pandemic hit, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And when I started traveling, I was actually able to get into remission by eating different foods around the world and kind of changing my outlook on work-life balance and health and how other cultures kind of approach reducing stress and being more community focused and also integrating more with nature. So travel has really affected my life in so many different ways.
That is fascinating. Now, I think we could do an entire podcast on the subject of seeking healing through food on the international lane.
Yeah.
I also have had a similar experience with that. And I think that there's so many ways that travel, it's sort of that juxtaposition of deciding, how am I going to think and use travel as a tool? And is it the right tool for for the intention I want my life to go in or the direction, right? Did you think
Yeah.
about that when you started?
I didn't fully think about that when I started. When I started traveling with friends and working remotely, I ended up taking one of my first like big international trips, and I spent 2 months in Italy. And when I came back and I did my blood work, my doctor was like, "What have you been doing?" And I'm like, "I've been eating pizza in Italy for 2 months." And he's like, "Keep doing that." And so being able to have this affirmation health wise that eating foods in other countries that I couldn't really have in the US, because whenever I'm in the US, I have to be full vegan, very strict, no bread, no cheese. But when I'm elsewhere in the world, because of the different practices of how food is produced, I don't have to have those restrictions. And then for my own writing, I've always looked for inspiration out in the world to kind of inspire the work that I've done in my past career as a TV writer and my current career as a fiction author. And so I had a sense of how travel would help me with my writing, but I didn't realize how much it would have. And it's also inspired my Substack, where I've done a lot of writing about my travels, the things that I've learned, and done a lot of essays about the different places that I've been in. And I think that travel as a tool has really kind of ramped up in how my career has taken off because of it.
Well, you are just a wonderful example of brightness and enthusiasm as a result of what the variety of impact that travel can have on one. Tell me, how long have you been a digital nomad? How long would you have you adopted that title for?
Yeah, about the last 4 years. Before then, I pretty much never traveled internationally. I was very much stuck to Los Angeles, pursuing my career as a TV writer. And when the pandemic hit, we kind of got shook loose. And instead of staying in Los Angeles, my friends started traveling, and my partner Kyle and I decided to go on this road trip around the U.S. and stay in empty Airbnbs, and which were heavily discounted because of those early days of the pandemic. And being able to spend a month in Nashville and go hiking every day, and a month in, the mountains, just really helped kind of get out of the little bubble that I was in LA, and kind of see what else the world had to offer. And so that was kind of like the impetus for getting out in the world. And I just feel so grateful, because when I was kind of stuck to LA and like working low paying jobs and really struggling, I dreamed to be a traveler and dreamed to be able to get out in the world. And so to be able to build a freelancing business and then also a business as an author has really allowed me to see the world in a way that I could only have dreamed of years ago.
So you had cast a vision when you were in LA working low-paid jobs, working to get into the profession as a Hollywood writer, and suddenly you were, to use your term, shook loose. Tell me about that. How did that feel?
It was really scary when the entire world shut down. The writer's room that I was working in turned into a Zoom room. And I just felt this sense of dread and fear, and also this feeling of being stuck, because even though I had ascended to where I wanted to be and I had gotten my first episode of TV to write, and I was like seeing like my name on the credits on screen, I didn't feel fulfilled. And when I was looking around at the people in Hollywood around me, I didn't get a sense that they were happy. And I sensed that I wanted something else other than being a TV writer in Hollywood. I sensed I wanted something else than just perpetually climbing a ladder that seemed to never end. And that's kind of what sent me into the world. And when I got my diagnosis, I had kind of this fork in the road of deciding, was I going to just stay in LA and just kind of stay quarantined in a bubble and just be really safe? Or was I going to go out in the world and see what it had to offer? And I decided to take the risk to go out into the world, because during the 2020 kind of uncertainty, it was a risk to go and start to travel, but it ended up paying off in a huge way. I was really motivated to kind of change something in my life because things weren't working, and travel, because my circumstances were completely changing and my environment was completely changing. I was also having to hold a kind of a magnifying glass to my own life and decide, okay, what is actually making me happy? What is working? What are some things I need to work on? And I also started traveling with my partner, Kyle, who also came up in Hollywood with me. And the two of us like really kind of like we're out in the world together. And it's been such an amazing journey traveling with him and meeting new friends and new communities and finding other people to travel with too. But the journey really it really challenges you in a way that is really inspiring and also scary at times.
And would you consider it a transformational journey as well as a physical journey?
Absolutely. I think that there were a lot of moments where, I was traveling to Venice, Italy, when there was no tourists there. We were some of the only tourists there. We got this really unique experience where we were walking through these foggy bridges over the canals in Venice, and it was just like completely empty and there was nobody there, which is really rare for
Yes,
Venice. I remember
really rare.
standing there. Yeah, I remember standing there with my partner Kyle and a few of our friends. I was like, this is so cool. This is amazing that we get to be here.
Yeah,
And I feel like we should be able to make something of this moment. And
yeah.
that led to me creating my first set of short stories in the Nomad Detective, which is the first compilation of cases. One of them is inspired by my time in Venice and that moody atmosphere of the fog rolling across the canals and thinking about all the mysteries that could take place there.
Yes, and that one's called The Nomad Detective in the Case of the Venetian Masquerade. So
Yeah, that's correct.
that's where the inspiration comes from. So one of the other titles was The Case of the Dead Woman's Pass. Can you tell me which geographical location inspired that?
Yeah. So at when we were traveling to Peru, we were going with a big group of friends, and my partner turned to me and he's like, "Do you want to do the Inca Trail?" And when I looked up the Inca Trail, I saw that it was a 4-day trek through the middle of nowhere, 26 miles through some of the most challenging terrain in the world. And the Inca Trail is something that I had never had on my radar before. But when I saw that this trail ended at Machu Picchu, and it was something that a lot of travelers had said had completely changed their lives, I knew that in that moment, merely like a month and a half before our trip to Peru, I'm like, I'm signing up for doing this. And this is me having no experience with hiking or a lot of camping. And so when I said yes to that experience, I knew that there was going to be something magical coming out of it. And so I did a little bit of training before the hike, but not very much. And then on the trail, I just felt like everything was so heightened because in Peru, when we're walking along the streets of Cusco, when you first arrive, there's all of these kind of ancient mysteries surrounding you. And the town just kind of feels like taken from a different time period. And when you're journeying into the mountains to start the Inca Trail, there's so many kind of like ruins on the journey to get to Machu Picchu that is just like really beautiful, but also kind of harkens to like another age of like explorers and ancient mysteries, and then alpacas just wander past you that are just wild, and it's just such a beautiful experience. And when I was going through the cloud forest and these just like gigantic clouds were rolling by, and like we could barely see the trail in front of us or like the edge of the cliff beside us, I was like, this would be great for a murder mystery. And so that's what inspired the story of the Dead Woman's Pass, is just these ancient mysteries where there's so many things we don't know about Machu Picchu and how it was formed. And a lot of our tour guides were like, we don't know how these stones got here, probably aliens. And so I love that kind of like unknown element of mystery and mystique around Peru and these ancient mysteries around Machu Picchu.
And so that's for our listeners. If you're considering using travel as a way to magnify your own self-expression, this is a classic example of geography actually stimulating our imagination, Amy's imagination, in a way that she created this entire short story in her book, The Nomad Detective, which has 4 short stories in it. Now, let's just circle back a little bit. How did your experience as a TV writer influence your approach to writing this? Did it help you to think of it as episodal?
Yeah. So, in my experience as a TV writer, I think that the thing that I really took away from my career working in Hollywood and my education at USC's screenwriting program was to write for your audience or your reader in this case, and to write things that in a way and to present them that really kind of take the reader on the journey. And I think that a problem with a lot of the books that I've been reading lately is that they're either talking down to the reader or they're not writing in a way that is capturing your attention and pulling you in. And they feel a little bit wandering or a little bit, and this is especially with some literary fiction that just feels like it's trying to be a meditation on something rather than a great story. And in Hollywood, when we're writing for TV, it's all about the act breaks and the structure to capture people and to have the characters change. And I think that that amount of technical training in story structure helped me write a book that really moved. And one of the pieces of feedback that I get from my readers is that it just moves so fast. I've had a
Yes, it
few
does.
friends. Thank you. I've had a few friends who read it on their flight to Venice, Italy, or to Canada,
Yeah.
and they were like, I could not put it down. I read it all before I arrived, or in the next day, and so I think that is such a gift as an author for readers to say that, because I think so many things are pulling our attention, and it's so hard to have somebody sit down and read something of yours. And so it's just such a privilege to have my readers say that it just like the pages, it's a page turner, and I think that that's what every author aspires to write.
Do you think you could help me turn my how-to book into a page turner? It's not so.
Absolutely. No, I think that even paid like how to, I've read some amazing how to books. Like there's this one book called The Mountain Is You that I think is written beautifully, that just kind of grabs you with every chapter and makes you confront your inner demons in a way that is so beautiful and so cool. And then also The 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, I think is a great like business how-to book that you just keep flipping, and it's just so easy to keep going. And so every book can be a page turner.
Yes, well, Tim Ferriss is a wonderful role model for many of us, as writers, as podcasters. I mean, he was one of the originals who really used online to reach his communities, which I'm a big fan. So tell me, your non-fiction book is focusing on sort of freelance writing, right? So how different was this process of writing fiction from the TV pieces that you did before? Did you find it was easier or more difficult?
Yeah, I think for my first nonfiction book, Six Figure Freelance Writer, it was a lot about kind of taking all of the pieces that I have written on my blog and for kind of like different people about how to be a freelance writer and how to succeed in the craft of freelance writing. And so I was having to pull from all of the guides that I have online on my website to try to figure out how to put everything together and package it in a way that felt like a curriculum, that when you were reading, each chapter was a step-by-step guide, and you could skip a chapter if you already knew how to do something, but also to imbue every chapter with the right checklists and how-to steps and personal stories that I've had. And then at the end of every chapter and in between sections, I have stories from my travels of dealing with different types of clients and different types of projects. And so it was a big effort in organization. I really moved that draft around to try to figure out what story played best there, or what piece of information should come before this one. And I had a lot of early beta readers who helped me really pressure test the book itself and make sure that it felt like it was clear and empowering and concise, and it would help people get results and help them build a freelancing career that would last. And this also was shaped by the conversations that I had with a lot of my coaching clients, because on occasion, I also help freelance writers who want to build their freelancing career, and I do one-on-one coaching with them. And so seeing what they were dealing with, and in my building materials for them, I was able to take that and put it into a book. So I think that nonfiction books that I write for myself and for my ghostwriting clients are such an effort in trying to find clarity and also to make it fun to read. And it is kind of almost a little bit more complex than fiction in some ways, because you're having to basically be a guiding light in the darkness for people who are trying to figure something out. And the moment you lose their attention, they're gone. You need to kind of like write. Yeah, you need to write the book in a way that is constantly giving them good new information and presenting it in a way that is clear and also engaging. And so that is the challenge that I always work with especially with my clients that are doing business books or how-to books. But once you really crack it, like the book sales like have really continued to increase and hold steady. And I think that that's also a testament to the fact that people who buy the book really get a lot of value out of it. And I keep meeting with readers every month. People reach out to me and are like, I read your book and like it just changed my approach to freelancing, has helped me land my first client or help me recover from burnout. And I think that is just so amazing as a writer to know that when you have a book out there that you put out a few years ago, it's still bringing back those readers and kind of bringing new people into your orbit, and also becoming a passive income stream to help you continue to write something else.
Yeah, so for our listeners who are considering what is your next project, or what is it you want to bring forth in the world, then Amy is giving us some great tools on actually how to make an engaging book, how to make something that is worthwhile. As a writer myself, or wannabe writer, I have two books out, but I would say that is a huge challenge. How do you keep all this straight in your head? How do you organize it in your head?
The thing that I really love writing about on my Substack is like productivity and creativity tips for writers, because the amount of structure you need in your life as a writer is actually pretty high. You can't just open a Word doc and start typing. You have to think about, what are the ways in which I want to share my message? What are the formats? And then if you're writing a book, working backwards with word count goals. And if you're writing a Substack, figuring, are you publishing once a week, twice a week? And then how are you taking one Substack blog post and then turning it into a podcast episode and then repurposing it here? And so there's a massive amount of structure that goes into this stuff, but it can be less time intensive. So when I'm describing the things I'm working on to people, it sounds like a lot, but it's actually the systems that I put into place really ensure that I'm not working crazy hours. I'm working very productive deep work sessions that then create a lot of value in different ways. And that's kind of the key, is to try to figure out, what is your goal? Who are you writing for? And then what do you want to get out of it? And then from there, kind of tweaking your systems to make it all sustainable.
I think I'm going to have to listen to this episode long after it's published several times, because there's a lot in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's so much kind of like magic that goes into being a writer, and hard work as well. But the strategy is like something that I actually really love. And I kind of love kind of having a little bit of an entrepreneurship mindset to being a writer, because I think that's the way that you're able to be successful in such a competitive world where there's so many things fighting for people's attention.
Absolutely. And how do you take that focus and apply it to your travel lifestyle? I mean, do you find that you go to a place with an idea of a piece of writing you're going to be doing? Or I know that now, for instance, I'm about to go on a 2-month trip to the UK. And the day we get back, there are going to be 30 podcasts published, one a day for the month of November, on the specific subject of returning home after living overseas and the recovery process. And so it's very specific. And so I'm seeking to get all my work done before I go for the podcasts that will come out in September and October, because while I'm gone, it's going to be full on repatriation, which is interesting because I'm going back to my native country from where I started my travel. So it's all sort of, somehow life manages to flow together. So I am wondering, how do you use this in terms of getting stuff done? And do you choose places with a view to creating some of your work for either for your blog on Substack or for the books that you're writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I also love what you're talking about, of trying to batch work and try to figure out how to organize around a publishing schedule. A lot of that comes into place in my process too. And I think that for this particular year of travel, my partner Kyle and I sat down in February and we're like, where do we want to go this year? And then we planned month by month. And then we kind of picked the different cities that we still had on our bucket list. So we started in South Korea, and then went to Japan, and ended up in Taiwan. And then we jumped to Singapore to see one of our clients. And so we had about 8 months of travel planned out in advance, because I think it's a lot easier to kind of figure out where we're going. And then when we're headed to our next destination, like a few weeks before, we start to plan more granularly, what are we doing in that place? And I think that if you're a digital nomad, it helps to have at least like a few months ahead planned. Yes. And it also helps with trying to find like different deals on Airbnbs or different accommodations, because if you're able to plan in advance, you can often get better deals. And when we're planning our schedule, we're trying to kind of find like, what are the places that are bucket list? We want to do so many different things. So we were in Kyoto for a whole month, where we trained with a samurai at a dojo, and we did all of this like crazy, really fun kind of activities with a group of friends. And then a few months later, we showed up in Krakow, Poland, and we're like, we are doing nothing this month. This is going to be a month of nothing. where we're going to be doing work, because that was also the month that I had to finish the Nomad Detective. And so that was due. And then my partner Kyle just put out a new app that is a movie recommendation app called Omless. And so our two projects were kind of being put out into the world that month. So we were like, we are just going to be enjoying Krakow and like eating ice cream and walking around that beautiful park that borders the city and doing nothing. And so we try to have like the very fun, exciting, action-packed months, and then the very low-key, we are doing deep work months to kind of balance it out.
Yeah, because actually you're not doing nothing. You're actually creating. And that takes a lot of time, energy, and focus. And so really those months of nothing are giving you space, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And by nothing, I mean, not a lot of like weekend trips or travel stuff, and really just trying to dig into the deep work projects that we're doing. Because even though we do a lot of work when we are in really exciting places, it's about trying to find the balance of, in a place like Japan, because it's just so special and unique. And there's so much to do on our bucket list that we knew that we were going to be out and about a lot more than in front of our computers. And so trying to kind of figure out what are the months that we want to kind of like soak in a place versus what is somewhere that maybe is a little more sleepy, that we are just kind of showing up to be able to invest more time into our own work.
And how is the next year looking for you?
I have no idea. And I think that that's kind of the exciting part of
Back
being a
to
digital
February.
nomad. And so we'll probably go back to see, well, we're headed to Madeira after London. And so I've heard such amazing things about that island. And so we're going to be staying with a bunch of our digital nomad friends. And then we're going on a road trip around the Northeast in the US. And then we're probably going to just kind of like hang out with family and then do a little bit of travel and then kind of take it easy for the holidays and then decide probably in January where we're headed next. And I think that as a digital nomad, it's also important to not, to give yourself some time to decompress from travel, and then kind of like what you're saying, thinking about coming back and kind of getting settled and grounded, and then decide what the next stage is so that you don't overcommit or do too much. Because I've met a lot of nomads who have spent too much time traveling and they grow weary of their travels, and it kind of takes a toll, and like you see the life draining from their eyes, and it's like it's time for them to like go somewhere and just be there for a little bit. And so it's important not to burn out as a nomad or a traveler of any type.
I think that's a very important conversation to have. I too have experienced that at different parts of my life when I've lived different places. Of course, that's a little bit of expat fatigue. When you're in one place for years, expat fatigue can also set in, which is one subject. But I think there also is digital nomad fatigue, and it's brought on by the travel. And I think the very language that you are using, you use the word decompress from travel, and you also talked about being shaken loose by COVID, but it was also shaken loose into the travel lane. So what is your sense for yourself of the ideal amount of, were you thinking of a decade of travel, 2 decades of travel? What are you thinking? If you were to project ahead, can you imagine at all doing this for more than 10 years?
I don't know. I think that this is something that I feel like almost has to be answered every year. And
Yes.
I think like there's been several points in our journey where I've been like, I think it's time to settle down. My partner Kyle's like, yeah, I think we should. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves on a plane to Portugal. And we're like, I think this is more fun. And so I believe that finding the passion and the fun of whatever it is that you're headed to. And it's also a lot easier as once you're a nomad and you've sold everything you've owned and you're living out of the carry-on suitcase, it's a lot easier to just book another trip versus settling down again. Then suddenly means acquiring furniture and kind of, it's a little bit more of a commitment to stop traveling, which is why it has been a lot easier to just go on another trip. And I think that we kind of are trying to make sure that we build in space so that if booking that next trip doesn't bring us to life and feel like it is fulfilling some part of our creativity or our need to explore, if that doesn't feel exciting to us, then that will be the time that we settle down. And so I think that that's really important for anyone who's kind of in this digital nomad cycle to know themselves and to give them that kind of cushion or that buffer to understand before they book another leg of travel, to look inward and to reflect on how they feel.
I think self-reflection is the greatest tool that we have as travelers, because the travel journey, the journey itself leaves an impression, I believe, on our souls at an invisible level. But we are also now more aware of the fact that we are leaving an impression on the globe as a result of our travel. And so I'm very grateful for the fact that I got to travel early in my life and lived overseas for 4 decades. And so I think that I'm very, very fortunate that now I can spend a lot of time reflecting and helping other people reflect in as to how we use travel as a tool.
I'm curious actually on your end, like, was there a point in time that you felt like this is the time that I want to slow down or change how I'm traveling? Like, what was that moment for you?
Yes, several times, actually. That happened many times. After we finished 15 years in Saudi Arabia, we sort of had bought into this mindset that, oh, we were going to move back to America and be quote unquote settled. And many of our colleagues, our peers, our friends, who all worked in the same corporation and did similar jobs, did that and have never left. We, on the other hand, moved back and within a few years realized this is not exactly the perfect place. How can we find a more perfect place and do this and? So for
Mm.
us, it was a question of we had attached ourselves to an idea that this was the right thing to do, settle, arriving, repatriating, settling. But then we discovered, no, there's more growth to go, because I feel like I grow as a human being when I'm traveling. And travel precipitates insight and foresight and hindsight. And so there have been many times in my life, and thank you for asking the question, Amy. And now we live in Mexico, which I would say is sort of America Light, but for a Scottish girl like me, it's still got the exoticism. There is so much to learn, and I want to be a lifelong learner. So, you are much early in a much earlier decade and have so much more to look forward to. I am in the reflection eras of thinking, so, what will the legacy be of all this travel that I've experienced?
I love that. And I love how you talked about that legacy of travel and how, and really kind of thinking about being a lifelong learner. I think that's really amazing. And I think that this is what a lot of people don't realize, like the power of long-term travel. And when people think about travel, they're like, oh, it's so exhausting. Like, it's very exhausting if you're, spending 7 days in Rome and you are on like a flight for 2 of those and you're dealing with the time zone. Like, that is exhausting. But the life
Yes.
of full-time travel, of like slow matting, like I like to call it sometimes, of like spending a month or more in one place, like then you
Yeah.
can actually dive in and get to know the locals, know the culture, and really appreciate where you are. And that
Mm,
also shifts your perspective more.
it does that. That is what takes to shift your perspective. And I believe the power of the long-term traveler, it seeks and leaks into your system at a very deep level, and actually taking that and binding it together with the hindsight of what has happened in the past, with the insight that you gain from that, and then being able to project a more balanced and temperate future using that wisdom is really key. And I think that that's what most of us creatives are about, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really, really well put. I think that if you're writing about anything, then you have to understand the people you're writing about, the people who are reading your book, and to understand people being, staying in one city for your whole life, or, one country for your whole life is going to kind of cut you off from being a global citizen and part of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, Amy. I really enjoyed it. And we've really covered a lot about travel. We talked about the power of long term, the decompression that is required because travel is intense, and being shaken loose from your mindset, your thinking, your behaviors, your very geographical location. What can you tell us about the Nomad Detective, and where can our listeners find this gem of a book?
Thank you. Yeah, our listeners can find the book at my website, amysuto.com, and my last name is spelled Suto. You can also find it on Amazon at The Nomad Detective, Volume 1. And basically, the book is following Detective Violet Chase, who's a globe-trotting private eye. She's trying to find her sister while solving cases around the world. And it's really inspired not only from my travels, but also from true crime stories that I've read about with, what happens in the digital nomad underground or what goes wrong in the world of long-term travel. And I think that stuff is really interesting. And, whenever I'm traveling, it's fascinating to be like, what could be the worst case scenario? And that's what I put into this book. And I think it's really, really fun.
Yeah, and I think there is a time and a place for us all to consider those alternatives. So thank you so much for joining us today. We will put all that information in the show notes. Now I have one question in finishing. If you were the fairy godmother of all digital nomads and all nomads who are currently enjoying and being outside in the world, what one hidden skill or superpower would you grant that community?
Yeah, I think I would grant that community the ability to, no matter what city you find yourself in, find one or two people that you are meant to meet in that city. And I think that that's something that I've tried to cultivate for myself in joining a bunch of digital nomad communities and staying in a lot of co-living hotels with digital nomads. And I think there's so many opportunities to broaden your horizons by meeting new people, not only locals, but also fellow travelers who cross paths with you in different journeys. And it was really cool to meet up with some nomad friends of mine in Edinburgh. And so I feel really lucky to have that network now, but I know new nomads, I would grant them the ability to magically find those people.
So Amy, your new global digital nomad is granting you the ability to find that one person in the one place that you're going to. Thank you today for this conversation, Amy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Doreen.